No, I am not going woke. Is treating people with humanity woke, Martin? What if it was your daughter or your son? Look, I'm incredibly disappointed that I have been so misconstrued. I have never suggested that I would ever put any at-risk prisoner into the general population, and nor did I ever suggest that putting a prisoner who is a...
Farage's new prisons chief just torched woke sentencing, then dropped a trans prison bombshell that's sending the left into meltdown. Buckle up, the full clash is next.
Okay, Vanessa Frake, we have to address the issues, of course, that have been seized upon by your political opponents, by the press today, and that is the topic of trans prisoners. The Supreme Court ruling states quite clearly biological men are men. They can't become women. Even Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, has said that no serious trans woman, and that's a biological man, could ever be allowed into the female prison estate. And yet today you said this should be judged on a case-by-case basis. Vanessa, are you going woke?
No, I am not going woke. Is treating people with humanity woke, Martin? What if it was your daughter or your son? Look, I'm incredibly disappointed that I have been so misconstrued. I have never suggested that I would ever put any at-risk prisoner into the general population, and nor did I ever suggest that putting a prisoner who is a risk to other prisoners in the general population. That is why I've been very clear. There are many complex, bespoke prisoners and risk assessments which are completed by skilled, experienced prison staff on a case-by-case basis is the way forward. At the end of the day, Martin, we are talking about 0.3% of the prison population. I'm focusing on the other 99.7%. I have worked with female offenders. I have seen the abuse that they have suffered. I would never, ever put a female offender in a position that brought back any angst or worry or concern to a female prisoner. Can I make that perfectly clear?
So I just want to spell that out once again. You do not believe, for example, that a biological man who now claims to be a woman, a trans woman, with a history of sex offending, they should never be allowed into a female prison estate. Is that your position?
That is absolutely crystal clear, my position.
Good. And what kind, on a case-by-case basis, for example, what kind of biological men perhaps could be allowed into a female prison?
Look,
I think people just want some clarity.
Again, Martin. Okay, look, if you've got a complete trans woman who has completely transgendered to a female, has been living as a female for the last 30 years, is not a sex offender, has lived their life as a woman for the last 30 years, what are you now telling me that we put them into the general population in the male estate? Because to me, that isn't humane, and it is not counting decency. I'm not saying that person should be in the general population in the female estate. This is a minefield, whichever way you look at it, whichever way you swing, whichever thoughts you have, it's a minefield, and it's always going to be difficult.
And Vanessa,
yes,
just one final,
and I abide by the law.
Just one final question. I just think people just want some clarity, and that is this: is this your personal opinion, or do you think it could become Reform Party policy?
I don't know. I haven't had that conversation. Nigel Farage is very aware of my position and what I think, but he still hired me.
Okay, Vanessa.
I'll say no more than that. Look, I've been doing this for 2 days, Martin.
Yeah, I understand that, Vanessa Frake. And look, you know, I've had you on the show a bunch of times before, and I never think you've had a woke bone in your body. But I had to get some clarity on this because a lot of people are talking about it. Welcome to the rough and tumble world of politics. That's the way it is.
This interview with Vanessa Frake, a former prison governor now advising Reform UK, exposes the dangerous and frankly delusional views held by the woke left on criminal justice. Frake, a woman who has seen the inside of our prisons firsthand, understands the real dangers these institutions face, and she isn't afraid to speak out against the coddling and appeasement that has become the hallmark of modern liberal policy. The left, with their obsession with identity politics, wants to treat every criminal as a unique snowflake, ignoring the hard facts and the very real threat they pose to society. They want to dismantle our prisons, not reform them, and replace them with some utopian vision of rehabilitation that ignores the reality of hardened criminals. This is why Frake's call for a supermax regime within our existing prison system is so important. She recognizes that some prisoners are simply too dangerous to be allowed free rein, and they need to be kept isolated and controlled to protect both the staff and the other inmates. Frake is right to point out the hypocrisy of the left's stance on sentencing. They cry out for justice reform while simultaneously advocating for lighter sentences for violent criminals. They want to tear down the very foundations of law and order, replacing them with a system where criminals are treated with more sympathy than their victims. This is not justice, it's a recipe for chaos. And then there's the issue of transgender inmates, a topic that the left seems determined to make as complicated as possible. They want to force us to accept the idea that a biological male who identifies as a woman should be housed in the female prison population. This is not only absurd, it's dangerous. Women in prison are already vulnerable, and to subject them to the risk of being housed with predatory males who identify as women is simply unconscionable. Frake is right to call for a case-by-case assessment of transgender inmates, but she is also right to make it clear that the safety of women in prison must come first. This isn't about being woke or uncaring, it's about common sense and protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. The left's obsession with transgender rights, while ignoring the very real concerns of women, is a clear example of their misplaced priorities. They are willing to sacrifice the safety of women to appease a vocal minority, and in doing so, they are betraying the very people they claim to represent. This interview with Frake is a wake-up call to the dangers of the woke left's agenda. We need to stand up for common sense, for the safety of our communities, and for the rights of women. We need to reject the left's divisive rhetoric and embrace a vision of justice that is both fair and effective. The left's approach to criminal justice is a disaster in the making. It is a system that coddles criminals, ignores the needs of victims, and puts the safety of the public at risk. We need to reject this dangerous ideology and embrace a more sensible and effective approach to law and order. This isn't about being a mean or uncaring. It's about protecting our society from the very real threat of violent crime. It's about ensuring that justice is served and that the victims of crime are not forgotten. It's about having a system that is fair, just, and effective.